Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen here with Linda Armstrong and Rita Giganti. Today is Friday, May the 22nd, 2020, 4 p.m. New York time. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining us for another episode of LOA Today, your daily dose of happy. And we were chatting amongst ourselves, getting ready to do this podcast because we're on the fifth part of our exploration of a book from 1939 by Raymond Holliwell called Working with the Law. And the two chapters we're looking at today, all of us, when we saw those titles, said, so this is going to be a different episode in some ways. It's good to have a challenge like this, though, sometimes, just to kind of shake things up a little bit. I think we can become a little bit complacent with what we believe in. Not that what we believe in is boring. It's not anything like that. But, sometimes it's good to have a little bit of a shakeup. So we shall see how shaken up we are today. Mm-hmm. So, ladies, Linda, how you doing today?
I'm good. I'm good. Kind of chuckling about these two chapters because one is the law of sacrifice, which I was getting triggered as I was reading it, not quite figuring out, but I think I know where he's coming from now. It's written a long time ago. And then the law of obedience, which is actually different to kind of how it sounds, but so we'll get into all of that.
Okay, yeah. Sounds good. And Rita, you're up and running. You got your cap on backwards. That's how I know you're ready and engaged. How's it going over there?
Yeah, that's my psychic cat.
That's right.
She's turning around, and I'm ready to roll.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, all is good. Can't complain. But I agree with Linda on this. Had to read this a few times because it was triggering certain aspects, and I understand it. Like she said, it was written a long time ago, so his words may not be the words that we use now, but his concepts, you have to really try and understand and take that into consideration when reading it, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then this is going to be a bit of a challenge, but that's a good thing. By the way, we already have one little note in the live stream. Joan is saying hello to you, Rita. So I'll pass that along to you.
Hi, Joan.
Yep. So, all right. Well, all right. Let's go right into it. There's no point in putting this off because this is going to be, this is going to shake things up a little bit here.
I'm going to start it off by saying the law of sacrifice and the law of obedience are more like the laws to the law, which is the God or the source energy that runs through us. I mean, that's the way I'm kind of taking it when you read through these. And it was tough. It was tough. I texted Rita a few days ago when I did the first chapter. I'm like, I don't know. it's triggering me. I have no idea what he's talking about. Right. And then she calls me today and she's like, yeah, I'm with you on that. Like, okay. So, but we kind of sorted it out within ourselves. Go ahead, Rita.
Yeah. I think to begin with the law of sacrifice, it's not like he's asking us to sacrifice everything in our life in order to be connected to the law. It's considering yourself or creating an ideal for yourself and a standard to hold up to, as opposed to just it being kind of wishy-washy, okay. and to really focus on that standard or that ideal for yourself and follow the path in what he may describe it as a righteous way. We all know if something doesn't feel right or good, or if it's not the right path or the right decision. So I think he is trying to impart is, don't half-ass it, even though he wasn't going to say it back then. Don't half-ass it. Have that ideal and, help it to help you grow as an individual, as a human, and get to the highest potential you can with that, making good decisions, keeping yourself in the forgiveness energy and the the non-judgment energy. That's where I feel, and I think out of that comes wisdom, when you're able to connect to those things and hold that ideal, and you learn a lot, and there's a lot of wisdom that comes with that.
Okay.
So
I'll add to that because when Rita was saying, what feels good and what's right for you, like when you follow that gut feeling, which is that connection to law, God, right? then you can make your decisions based on that. So he's kind of referencing how thought, where there's the law of thought, started the book out, right?
Right.
Is and law is God, right? Like that's the ultimate. So when you feel and you sense and you know what's right and you follow it, that's good. But sometimes you're pulled out there from other people, other things. So like that's where the obedience thing comes into. But it's almost like, I guess we could say, you want to sacrifice the need for approval or for following along with other people's who you think may know better than you, ideals and things like that, that start running your life. And that's not the connection to the law, God, because the law is God in this book. Right? That pulls you off of it. So that's really, I think a lot of it just keeps getting back to that. So when you're, what you're sacrificing, I guess, is like all the distractions. Well, I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Yeah, that will pull you off the path. Now, the path can be many paths. I don't think that there's just, I don't think he means to say there's just one path. I think there's many paths. It's how you choose to take that path that makes it the ideal for you. And I think, just take, for instance, if you were going to become a singer or a dancer or something, well, you're not going to just say, oh, I'll just wing it. I'll just I'll take a couple of classes, but I don't feel like really putting my heart and soul into it and creating that energy to build it. And then, and then you see it, you end up it not really going the way you'd like it to go. And then you're blaming, everybody around you, God, the whole thing, but you weren't really consistent and you weren't sacrificing other things that probably could have waited because of this ideal that you had, that you wanted to create this energy. Right. And so, putting that off at least that's how so if someone were to had the desire to practice the singing and, continued on the path of doing things to make it grow, well, then they're going to get the dream that they're looking for. But if they're, if they're putting distractions in their way and sacrificing the things that, can help them move away from that, then it's not going to work.
This reminds me a lot. It reminds me a lot of Neville Goddard, because Neville Goddard began his speaking career in the same decade that this book was written. He began in the early 1930s and continued through the late 1960s. So he had quite a speaking career. And it's often easy to forget this, but that was a period of time where here in the United States, especially, religion, particularly Christianity, was really in its heyday. I think it's probably safe to say. And so when Neville did his speaking and his teaching and his writing, he was writing to and speaking to an audience that already thought in a certain way, because they had been kind of pre-programmed, if you will, by their church, by the belief system. So he actually ended up taking pieces, not the whole, but pieces of the Bible, and taking biblical verses and so forth, and using that as a way to explain what concepts he was actually trying to teach. Now, in fact, if you take what he was teaching and compare it to what traditional Christian teaching tells you, it was really quite divergent. I mean, in his mind, God was the equivalent of consciousness. Right. God was the equivalent of Jesus was the equivalent of consciousness. In other words, he even literally said in many places that these were not physical beings walking the planet. These were part of a metaphorical play going on. I mean, so this is like a very broad divergence from what the Christian church would teach. They were teaching something quite different from that.
Right.
In other words, he was trying to reach to the audience in a way that they would understand. Well, the concepts of sacrifice and obedience were big in that time.
Yes.
They were very big. This is a way, I think, that he was trying to reach out and say, okay, here's how I think you can understand what it is that I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah, and back then they even sacrificed animals, for, I mean, that's how far it went. They would sacrifice, people even sacrifice people thinking that that's what God, or claiming that that's what God would want, Go ahead, Linda, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, what Walt just said is perfect, because I'm like holding on to a note I'm trying want to say, and exactly what you said leads right into it, because there's a part and the two work together. These two chapters, they should just be one chapter, really.
Right.
Because he writes in there, religions have gone the wrong way with its understanding of God. Once the law, God, because he's always referring to the law as God, is understood, we hold the secrets to eternal happiness and peace, right? And all those other chapters talking about how, you know, the law and allowing and all of those other things, when you're staying focused to what you know is true for you inside and following that comes through, then everything's great. Like you have the world at your hands.
Right.
But okay, that's that note.
It
Oh,
reminds
Yeah,
me of
what you were
what,
just saying is exactly it, you know, because
Yeah.
I see the similarities as well. And yeah, so we you know, because we have all these other judgments as to what sacrifice and obedience means,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It reminds me of
then-
what Cindy Chavez and I went through when we were going through the Neville books, because literally we would come to certain books, certain chapters, and we look at the title of the chapter. We both look at each other like, this is not going to end well. But we would work through it word by word, sentence by sentence, and do what we used. We called it the Neville translation ring, or the Neville Decoder Ring, and we would translate word for word. What is he actually saying here? Until finally, after we'd replaced all the metaphors, we had a coherent sentence, so to speak, and we'd say, "Oh, well, that's law of attraction." But the first
Yeah.
sentence, when you first read it, it didn't sound anything like law of attraction. It was so far away, it was ridiculous.
Right.
Well, and one more note to what I just last said is I wrote down the word obey. This is his words, means to submit to rule or comply with orders and instructions. So when you follow like all those previous laws that the book talks about on how to be able to, you know, pretty much manifest and create and live a happy, peaceful life.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. So in my words, it was more like obedience of the law is how we create.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
yeah. And so like sacrificing the things that pull us off of that, where we give our power away, holds you more true to. And Rita was talking before about how if you want to be, I don't know if you were, I
A
forget your
dancer
examples.
or a singer.
Yeah. So like athletes, they're really strict, right? They have,
Sure. They're disciplined.
because they're staying with that goal. They're not letting stuff pull them off. Right.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. If you can follow that, it's the same goes for the spirituality piece. That it could be physical, it could be mental, and it could be part of the spiritual as well. And that's what I think he's saying. It just doesn't have to be in one aspect of the life. You know, discipline yourself to whether it be journaling or meditation or, you know, but again, I think people sometimes hold such a high standard, and then if they don't do it, they beat themselves up, and that's not good either. You know, it's like, you know, say I was meditating for a month straight and I missed one day. Well, am I going to beat myself up over that? I missed a day, and now we move on. You know what I mean? It's
and,
not.
And you know what? It doesn't feel good because it's not truth, right? Your truth is, okay, I'll get this. I can do this, you know,
Right.
instead of punishing yourself. It's like, I'd rather reward myself on how good I've done so far and how I can continue.
Well, that's what'll get you to do it again. If
Yeah.
you judge yourself, it'll be like, fuck, I screwed up. I'm not
Right.
doing it.
I'm no
Right?
good. I give up.
No, can I curse on this thing? I don't even know.
Yeah. I don't know.
It has happened. We've gone blue sometimes, although we try to keep it as G as we can, but still.
They haven't
Okay.
taken down any videos, right? So
No.
Yeah.
All right.
All of our programs are marked not for children, so I think we're safe, you know.
Awesome.
But the concept of sacrifice actually was harder for me than obedience, which is really strange for me to say because I'm about as non-obedient as you can be when it comes to the typical definition of the word. But sacrifice to me, that just the word itself kind of set me off before we even got into what the chapter was all about.
Right.
Because of the way that word is normally used. So if we were to pick different words than sacrifice and obedience to describe what it is he's saying there, could we come up with alternatives? Because that's what we ended up doing with Neville. We ended up saying, okay, here's what Neville really means. Let's use these words instead. And then the whole thing became plain.
Well, he uses the word discipline, which is maybe a little bit better. Although some people do not like discipline because of what it can connotate. But I think
Right.
if you understand it in the form of disciplining yourself and holding that ideal, and then working with that, that might be an easier thing to digest than the sacrifice. And I think we all had an issue with it because you guys were raised Catholic.
I was not. No.
Okay.
I was.
So coming from the Catholic religion, you should sacrifice your whole life. And then coming from an Italian background, keep sacrificing, because that's the only way you're going to get redeemed in this life.
There's a reason why Vatican City is in the midst of a country called Italy.
Yeah, exactly. So of course it triggers me. I'm like, wait a minute. But now when I read further and the word discipline, I can understand that because I've disciplined myself to hold a higher standard to me or a higher ideal of myself. So it's cool. It's all good. You got another word?
I got a little paragraph on this thing with discipline that I'm going to read. He says, an undisciplined life is an insane life. We must pull ourselves together around high ideals of clean, serviceable, and effective living under the highest leadership we know, or under the teachings and the examples of a master.
Now, if I were going to translate that using the equivalent of a Neville Decoder Ring, I would say that the master in Nevilleese anyway is our consciousness, because truly we are God, right?
Right.
So start doing some word replacements, and I start hearing that as, if you want to get the most out of life, you need to focus yourself more consistently on what it is that is appropriate for you to focus on.
Right.
Because that's how you maintain the level of coherent consistency that you need as your own creator to create
the law of consistency. That's perfect.
Consistency. Yeah, that's probably
law of consistency. I
knew we could get there.
I like it. When I'm not sure of which way, like when I'm having when I'm questioning myself, because there's other things coming in and I'm human, so I question. I go back to the question in my mind and I say, either what would love do or what would Jesus do? Because it depends on who I feel like connecting. It's the same thing, but in my head, I'm just saying one or the other. That answer gives you the right answer, in my opinion. I've never been steered the wrong way when I've asked that.
The following paragraph says, the highest example of a master is the Christ. In all his work and teachings, he proved that discipline, self-control, and self-mastery ever precede wisdom and achievement. Right?
And that also makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean,
so it's disciplining yourself in the highest way. It's not like we think of discipline, I did something wrong and get beaten for it. It's like,
of course.
But it is more that Olympic athlete discipline, sticking to what you know and doing all that you can do to be the best you can be, right? Whether that's helping people or,
So I can't tell you how many people come to me and say, can you teach me how to connect to the spirit world? Can you teach me how to get information, from the masters, the teachers, the guides, the angels, whoever? And I say to them, well, are you ready to create, some kind of practice for yourself? Because that's what it's going to take to have that connection, whether that be, meditating consistently, contemplating, if that's, because sometimes I just have conversations and I'm contemplating, journaling, like there has to be where every day you do that connection. So are you ready for that? If they tell me yes, then I give them a million ways that they can connect. And I say, now choose one that feels good to you, because there is no right and there is no wrong. The only thing there is, and I'm going to say it again because he says it, is the discipline of it. Right. And that's how you'll achieve it.
Right.
Or as we're translating it now, the consistency of it.
The consistency. Yeah. Thank you. I love that.
I think that's a perfect way to sum that up.
Yeah.
I love it.
Too. It also reminds me of a thing that we talked about, that Cindy and I talked about when we were discussing Neville. And in part because Neville brought it up himself in one of the books. I can't remember which one, but I know he brought this up. And that's the concept of sin, which has a very specific meaning in Christian circles. But Cindy, being the wonderful religious scholar that she is and with tremendous background, was able to immediately, without even looking it up, point out to me that sin had a very different original definition when you look back to what they call the etymology of it, the origins of the word. It turns out that the word sin simply means you missed the mark. You were aiming an arrow at a target and you missed.
Yeah,
No
and
blame.
we actually talked about that, I think, last week, right? The whole
I think we did.
we brought
Yeah.
up Ho'oponopono, which is missing the mark.
That's right. Yeah. There's no blame associated. There's no shame. It's just you didn't aim right. So aim better. And when you start thinking about it that way, now all of a sudden the whole landscape changes.
It's true because again, in the Catholic religion, sin, well, if it's a mortal sin, we talk about mortal sins and then venial sins, right? Venial sins was like, maybe you cursed or you did, like stupid little crap. Mortal sin was like one of the 10 commandments, right? Things like that, or disobeying your mother or your father, whatever. And now you had to go and tell someone to be forgiven for that.
Right.
Like, they really made it out to be, so demeaning to the person.
Oh yeah, blame and shame.
And that of course then you felt this judgment towards yourself. And so when I stopped doing all of that and I just sat and I said, I'm sorry, I will, I want to do better. And, I said to Spirit, I said to God, it was like instant, like all of it just lifted. Like all of it just, there was no judgment. I didn't hold on to it. It wasn't anything like that. You know what I mean?
Yep.
You know what? It makes me also think of Dr. Emoto's work with impressions in water, right? Because we're mostly water. So all that negative self-talk and all that beating up and using this discipline maybe in a harsh negative way, you're just holding that and making everything harder, right? So when you can forgive yourself for these little bumps in the road, right? Or like find a different way to talk to yourself about the things you think where you missed the mark, right?
Right.
So you can bring yourself back in a gentle way, still holding that focus and staying true and, returning to being that disciplined, obedient to your purpose type of a thing.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
really good. So now I'm wondering about the second word, which was obedience. We found that sacrifice really is better understood as consistency. So I wonder what the better word is for obedience. I bet you between the three of us, we can come up with it. We just have to kind of look at it carefully.
I would say following your truth, saying obedient to that, which is the part of you that we were all part of God, right? But when we know that part of ourselves and stay true to that inner knowing, and it's always the same thing where the truth will always make you feel lighter, a lie makes you feel heavier.
Right.
So if you can have that be your guidance as to what's in alignment or not, obedience could be alignment.
I like.
Yeah,
Sounds
that
good.
works.
Sounds good. Can
That's a
you
good-
pull up a paragraph or something from the book that kind of gives us a chance to test this little theory we have? Okay, what we're really talking about is, and see if it actually lines up that way.
So yeah, I put down page 159 on my things. So
Okay.
let me see if I find it. Wouldn't be 159 in the actual book though, because
Mine is printed out, so I'll just follow what you're doing.
Okay. So the word obey, let me get the glasses on, means, well, I wrote down the word obey means submit to rule or comply with orders and instructions. So I wrote that around page 159. So why did I do that? Let's see.
Which kind of reminds me of playing by the rules of the game.
Oh, here we go.
Right.
So it says, once the law is understood, we hold the secrets of eternal happiness, peace, and domination over mastery over all of the forces around us. The word obey means to submit to rule or to comply with orders or instructions. Obedience then is the governor of all movement, whether it be mechanical, literal, or spiritual. A giant machine without its governor would tear itself apart. That's true, right?
It's true,
Yeah.
yeah.
It would utterly be destroyed because it failed to obey its own laws of momentum and gravity. An intellectual giant who fails to comply with the laws of learning will become an idiot. A student failing to comply with or obey the instructions of spirit, the law of God, will reverse that good and will create evil. We are dependent entirely on obedience for our success or failure in life.
So, yeah, I think obedience might be a little bit what did we say? Off the mark?
Yeah.
I think alignment is way better. If we put
It was
alignment in every
sinful.
one of those.
Yeah, because it's a little hard to swallow with those words, but I like the alignment, because I think if you just say, if you align with the law, and you hold true to that, right? So align with the thoughts, the good thoughts, align with the good energy, all of that, then it's automatic almost that you would comply to whatever the right thing is. Like you know what I'm saying? Like you
Yeah.
wouldn't need to be quote unquote obedient. But
You know
I
what?
think he's using it. I think he's using that word, maybe back then that was the word. 1938, 39. But I like the alignment much better, to be honest with you.
You know
So
what?
it's like if we plant thoughts of worry, right? The law you obey, he's saying, will
Right.
give you something to worry about.
Right. And
Right?
he does talk about that in the book too somewhere.
Yeah. If you align, so let's use the word align. If you plant thoughts of worry, the law you align with will give you exactly what you're asking for, something
Right.
to worry about.
Right.
Right.
So I made some more notes, and one of my notes says making sense now. So I'll get to that. I don't know what it was. But I'm on page 160 of my page, doesn't matter about the page, because it's a Kindle and I blew up the words. All our problems of life are due in some measure to our obedience to the law of thought and its creator, God. Our difficulties have been in knowing what to obey and what not to obey. So that goes to, I think, exactly what Rita was just talking about. Now there's something on, here we go. He who obeys the laws of nature and acts as her obedient servant later become the master and reaps a full harvest. And he goes into that whole thing about planting seeds and all of that kind of stuff.
Right. Yes, because we haven't obeyed that law, correct? Because Mother Earth right now is purging her ass off because of what we've done, what we've created here. And, with the crops and with, the chemicals and the pollution and all that. So we're getting exactly what our obedience went in a completely different direction.
Right.
And so now we're reaping that, we're reaping what we sowed pretty much.
So, and here's another thing in the same line of thought. He says, our mistakes are largely due to the fact that we have obeyed more rapidly the laws of earth than the laws of spirit. I think we would say the laws of man, maybe.
Yes.
And the laws of spirit.
Yes.
We have subjected our ideas to the outward appearances of things rather than the inner truths as the law teaches them.
Right. So in this sense, obey isn't like someone commanding you to obey them. This is, obey the law in the sense of properly choose what is for your highest good. And
so here he uses the word obey more. If we are to obey the spirit within us rather than the conditions about us,
right, then
the law requires us to first think things into existence from the within, before we shall reap them in the without, before we see them. Okay, so that's great because we all get that.
Perfect. Yes.
But there's one more part. Let me see what this says. It says the law reads, as ye sow, so shall ye reap, which is mathematically accurate and true. If you plant a turnip seed, nature does not produce potatoes. If you plant a corn seed, nature does not make a mistake and bring forth a giant oak tree. On the same reasoning, if you plant thoughts of worry, this is what Rita was talking about, the law you obey will give you the something to worry about. It will produce more and more circumstances to increase your worries. If you think of disease and lack, you will receive exactly what you're expecting, whatever law you obey will in turn serve you. The most important thing then is to know what to obey.
Right.
Yeah.
Two thoughts came to my mind.
I mean, we all do this when it comes to worry, when it comes to, anything, fear, all of that. So we can put our thoughts to that, or we could choose to put it someplace else, and we will create something else if we do that. See, you have to know you can do that. That's the thing. That people need to realize that they are worthy enough. They can create whatever they desire, but to know that they are the ones creating, that God is not the one, creating their life for them. That is why you have free will. There should be no blame or anything placed, because again, it's saying, who do you serve here? Do you serve, what's on the outside of you, or do you serve what's on the inside of you?
Right. And you know what? Even though I teach this stuff, and we all do, we're all learning and growing all the time. But there's a situation in my life where when I look at it now, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe how much I put my thoughts into the wrong place, into the problem. And instead of, and there's so many things to do to get out of the problem, but kept going back to the problem, right? Kept letting that rule, which is outside of me rather than what I know was inside me. It totally prolonged the whole entire thing.
Yeah.
And so why did I have to do that again? I guess I needed to learn it deeper.
Well, there's a lot of temptation to
well, it's very easy. It's so easy to go to the negative thought, and it takes this discipline, right? Obedience, sacrifice those thoughts that don't survive you. Let's sacrifice those in the way that we think of sacrifice. Nail it to the cross and burn it. That thought that doesn't serve you.
Yeah. As we were discussing all of these, a few thoughts went through my mind. Let me just kind of go through them kind of in random order. And I think that we'll see more ways that this kind of irons itself out. The first thought that went through my mind is the word obedience can be tied to a plant. There is a plant you ladies probably know called an obedience plant. Oh, and an obedient plant is a plant. Have you never heard that one?
No.
My wife taught me. Well, that's what happens when you're married to a gardener. But an obedient plant is a plant that if you take the plant as it's growing up with the stalk and so forth, and you bend it a certain way, it will retain that shape, and it will keep growing in that way.
Yeah, like a bonsai.
Yeah, exactly. Very similar, although without cutting. You simply do it by bending.
Okay.
Yeah, and an obedient plant can actually be made obedient to grow whatever direction you want it to grow, which is something that, amazingly, a lot of homeowners want to know why we can't do that with all plants. They want the plants to, grow in the direction they want to be able to see it, not where the sun is. And we say, well, the sun goes this way, and that's where the plant goes. No. I want the plant to grow this way.
Yeah, but can every plant be an obedient plant as long as you follow the different things in nature that will allow it to be? Is that possible? Sure. Or are there only some plants obedient plants?
There is one obedient plant, and it is called the obedient plant.
Oh, it's an actual plant.
It's an actual plant that has the name the obedient plant. Yes, because all the other plants they obey the sun. They follow the sun because they know that's where the light is. So they're good at that.
Okay, I get it.
Which is also hard to explain to homeowners sometimes, but that's another story. The other thoughts that went through my mind were, when we're talking about going inside, because that's really what he's talking about. He's talking about taking guidance from inside. We are, in essence, saying, don't go outside for your guidance. People often think of God as being external.
Right.
So the kind of obedience I think he may be talking about here, and I'm still not sure what the replacement word is being true, to use Linda's word, true to the God within, which is the true you. That's the internal you, the inner being part, the part that's connected to source energy, the part that when you reach inside for guidance, that's where you're actually getting your message from. So in other words, he's saying obedience is where you are true to that connection that you were talking about, Rita, that internal connection. You are getting your guidance from that connection. You are basically modeling your life and what you're choosing to focus your attention on, so forth, on that connection. That is what I think he's calling obedience. And kind of like the obedient plant, if you work on, basically shaping that connection, like you shape an obedient plant, you end up with a plant that grows in the direction that you want to grow in yourself.
Right. So could we say the law of the highest good? Well,
that could also be thought of as being aggregate for a bunch of people.
Right.
What we're talking about is your own highest good.
Right. Got to think of another word for that.
Yeah, this one's a little bit trickier. Consistency was easier, I think, with sacrifice. This one's a little bit trickier.
I highlighted 2 paragraphs. Maybe something will come of that.
Okay.
The first one I highlighted was, the purpose of our lesson is to learn how we might properly choose and serve the law for our highest good. We either serve principle or things in all that we think and do. things are the events or the results of invisible causes, whereas principle is the true cause and is spirit.
So
Principle is
principle.
that, maybe. Principle is that which we think in our minds, and things are the results of those thoughts.
All right. I like it better. The law
That's
of
better.
principle.
But here, I'll read this other paragraph, see if it
Go
takes a
ahead.
second. It says, years ago, a relative of mine worshipped illusions and things. He strove to accumulate riches. He worked so hard gaining his wealth that he lost his health. Then he turned about and tried to gain his health by spending his wealth. It's like the woman who ate the fly, whatever.
Yeah.
And then in the end, he passed away, a disappointed and disillusioned man. That man, like so many others, had started out in his life with the wrong concept of the law of God.
So, he didn't get the true meaning. He was just using his money to try and gain his health, but he didn't. If he would have gotten maybe the true meaning of it, of why he got to that place, he may have reversed his illness and healed himself.
Right. Or maybe if the desire for riches was for good and not for ego or something
Right.
like that. Because it's like
Right.
he gave the power was all outside of him, even though he was able to do things,
Right.
but he was
Didn't
never
matter.
connected.
Right. And even in the end, he wasn't connected because he was disappointed and disillusioned. And
Right.
that's a good word too. People do have those illusions of even illusions of grandeur, and they think, again, things are more on the outside. They look at cars or they look at jewelry. It's not that you can't have that or you can't admire that. That isn't what life is, though. That's the bottom line. You can have, if you have this ideal and you're connected to your inner self, you can have whatever you want, because you'll take that on as not an ego thing. It'll be in accordance to the law, right?
Right.
So go
I
ahead.
think especially if you're doing things that bring good into the world, right? Like that's your focus, or that's where your passion is, then money follows, right? So you
Right.
accumulate a lot of money and you can do so much for other people, but you can also do for yourself. Buy, and
Of course.
really reward yourself, because if you don't, that means you're not worthy of having beautiful things. Like you want to have that everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
No matter what that is.
Yeah.
The phrase cause and effect keeps running through my mind in regard to
Yes.
that. What he's describing here is the true cause for effects. Again, drawing from law of attraction theory and contrasting and comparing it to the way most people believe, their lives play out based on their interpretation of external events. For instance, we may have somebody gets sick. I mean, obviously we've been dealing with sickness a lot lately, so that comes to my mind. And in traditional medicine, sickness is something that happens physically to the body through some external cause that comes in, and then it's our job as physicians and healers and so forth to identify what that physical cause and remove it or treat it in some way to cure the body. That's the way illness is thought of. But
Sure.
the new perspective is, well, everything originates from within. We are creators.
Right.
So when we vibrate to something internally, it manifests externally. So
Right.
as conscious creators, we are in the process of learning how to recognize that internal cause and effect that we in the past would have associated with something going on externally. So we deal with a health issue. We say, well, okay, yeah, we certainly want to treat external stuff, but now we also understand that our thoughts very likely led to that disease condition in the first place, and our health can also be recreated through that same thought process. In other words, our thoughts become the originator, and our thoughts are internally driven.
Right.
So it becomes a reorientation to a different way of thinking. It becomes a new form of cause and effect, a new way of understanding cause and effect. So
Right.
I'm hearing obedience as being obedient to a new understanding of what the true cause and effect of things really is.
I love it.
I want to add one thing to all of that. So the last thing I've highlighted in the book says we want quick returns, forgetting that the law moves forgetting that the law moves slowly, yet it works perfectly and well. We want instantaneous healings of our diseases, but we are loath to give up the net of habits that caused them, which goes right back to the first one, right? Sacrifice,
Right.
obedience.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when we replace sacrifice with consistency, now it makes really good sense to understand that replacing obedience with this truth or trueness to the true roles, the true cause and effect in our
Right.
lives, we're now learning to be consistent in our application and understanding of the true cause and effect. Well, yeah, now the whole thing really starts to make sense.
Yeah. Are we writing a new book? Is that what's happening here?
Either that or else we're updating Holliwell's book. I'm not sure which.
You know what? I do have one more thing to read. This is like how he closes out the chapter.
Yeah.
Okay. So it says, all that is mine is thine. This is the law acting through us. As we obey the law, we humble our personal self to the divine self within us. We refuse to accept the outer appearance of things as being final and true, but we turn within and seek that which is real and true as God, the law, intended it to be. Let us live with God in his work, not after we die, not tomorrow or next year, but right here, right now. God's kingdom is all about us, awaiting our acknowledgement or obedience of his law. We must be able to converse and live with God, the law, in our daily life. Then we shall live with love and joy, with hope and wealth and peace here and everywhere. It is ours for the decision. And there's one little quote thingy here. It says, if they obey and serve him, they shall spend their days in prosperity and their years in pleasure. So,
Oh, Job, right?
yes.
You
yes.
know the story of Job and how he
No.
suffered.
No.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
Three, 6, 11, Job. I don't know.
36:11. Yeah.
Yeah.
He suffered beyond your imagination.
Oh, crazy.
Everything was taken from him.
Yep.
And here's the piece that I think what they're trying to show with Job, I mean, I love the fact that he put him in there, was no matter what, he was consistent in believing the highest good, even though he suffered the way he did. He really did not waver. And in the end, he got back tenfold what he lost. So, you know, it's
Which
Yeah,
is
so
a
I
form
think
of
I like the law of alignment. I think that works, like sticking to that alignment and that truth within
alignment.
us.
Yep.
all right.
And
So
not
we
being
have the law of
pulled off.
alignment, and what else?
Do we have another one? I don't know.
What was
Well,
that last one?
Alignment is a good way of summarizing what we were talking about.
Okay, so but that was for the sacrifice, right? Peace.
Well, sacrifice was consistency.
Oh, consistency and alignment. Okay.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Okay.
So obedience is basically alignment, and sacrifice basically consistency, which puts it into terminology that makes much more sense to us here in the 21st century.
That works. But it wasn't easy getting through those 2 chapters, I have to say. I read parts of it over and over again.
You know,
like, what am I not getting?
I think that one of the difficulties that anybody who writes a book like this has, because they all like to break it up into laws, right? I mean,
yeah,
how many authors have broken their concepts up into laws? The difficulty, though, is when you break it up into laws using words that are familiar to all of us, because you're trying to organize your thoughts in a way to explain them to your readers in a way that they'll get it. That's why they do it. That's why they break it up into laws. But by the same token, it's almost like when you're a legislator creating human laws, it's so easy to basically step on your own 2 feet when you're creating the laws, to trip over your own concepts, because the concepts don't necessarily work the way that the words do. So you're constantly trying to make the concepts fit the words and bend the words around to make them fit the concepts and so forth. And it's tricky for an author.
And then create unnecessary laws to control the people.
There you go.
Right.
There you go.
No, and then
you're not COVID chipping me. I'm sorry. I'm out.
That's it.
Yeah. So it's. I mean, I understand why authors will like to explain things in terms of laws, but I also think they set themselves up, because when they get into it, they realize, oh, wait a minute, how do I make this thing work? How do I make sense out of this thing that I'm trying to explain?
Maybe we only need 2 laws, the law of truth and the law of alignment.
Well,
Let's do a book, Rita, The Law of Truth and the Law of Alignment.
That's it. There's the
There
next
are two
book.
laws.
I guess I'm biased because I do a show on the law of attraction. I think there's one law of attraction. I think that one really explains it.
Yeah.
It does require a little explanation to understand it, and it took me a while to get it, and that's one of the reasons why I choose to do a podcast. But I take Abraham Hicks at their word. Abraham has said, "We have searched high and low throughout the universe. We have found one true law that always applies everywhere, and that's the law of attraction."
Right.
And so that's why they call it the law of attraction.
Right.
Right. And
I'll
if you
buy
don't
that
stay
one.
in alignment with what you want to attract, that's when the chaos comes up.
Yeah, no kidding. And we're really good at that.
When you don't stick to your truth, alignment, and the law of attraction. There's the title.
There it
Okay.
is.
So
Truth,
we have a
alignment,
group book
and
we're
the
ready.
law of attraction. All right, Linda.
It's
Start
going to
the
be coming
book.
up soon. You'll be able to buy it on Amazon. Place your advance orders now.
Yes. We'll have it ready in a week.
Yeah.
Right. Or somebody listening to this will, and we're like, hey, that's our title.
Maybe you want to give yourself a little more time, though, because if you're going to have 3 or 4 different concepts in there, you're going to have to make sure that they don't step on each other's toes. That may take a little time to iron that out. So give yourself a little more than a week.
Well, we can make it the better, because really that's ultimately we're getting too confused. We ought to just keep things simple. Stick to those truths. What's your
simplicity.
Your truth.
Right.
It's interesting to me that I've stated this from the beginning of when we first started working on this book, that I hadn't heard of it. I think I'm beginning to understand perhaps why this didn't really get to the level of being famous that some of the others did. It didn't reach the level of a Napoleon Hill or a Neville Goddard or whatever. I suspect it probably sold pretty well. If that, if copies hung around all this time, it had to have some level of sales.
Yeah, of course.
But because he had his own little inconsistencies in what he was trying to say that you couldn't quite reconcile if you didn't have today's training, I could see how that would make it difficult for a book like that to compete with some of the others.
Yeah. Plus, if it's triggering, if words are triggering us in this age, could you imagine what it did to others back then who were, what religion was it? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So if you couldn't decipher or figure out, like we're doing now, we're talking about it, we're creating new words, we're figuring it out. If you couldn't do that, and if you were short-sighted in that, there was no way.
And it really helps to have today's concepts.
Yes.
I mean, these concepts have evolved over many centuries, but more recently they've evolved tremendously over the last 20 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just been a major evolution in the way this stuff is explained.
I think it has been because of, look where we are now. If we didn't have these concepts now, we'd be up Schitt's Creek. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Yeah.
And with this whole ascension, as the vibrations rising, then more of us can hear how it needs to be presented out to the world to get more of us to hear it.
Or to put it another way, more of us understand how to understand it ourselves, because what we're talking about is a vibration raising, right?
Right.
So as
exactly.
all of us raise our vibrational levels, we need a way to be able to describe in clarity what it is that we're now feeling that we didn't really feel before. So you have to have language evolving to go along with it.
Sure. Now, Walt, have you ever done a show for the Ascension?
Not really. We touched upon it, and we got a little deeper. I think maybe your first show, Rita.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Okay.
That's something we can do as a topic. Maybe we do that following. Not next week. We have the last chapter of this book, but maybe the following week, maybe we actually start.
Yeah, we're gonna have.
I don't know how much time we have to put in on that. I don't really know the subject well enough. I'll be listening to you ladies to find out. But
we have Harold Peck coming up, but not on. Remember, I said on the 5th.
That's
but
right.
He needs to go another week after that. Maybe the week
Chief
after.
Harold. Yeah.
He's going to be taking on some. He's going to be taking on this a hike. In support of different things that he'll talk about to raise awareness and to bring.
That's awesome.
Actually, it's actually like a growth thing for him, a healing journey for him as he goes along it. Because if you know his story, he's going to elaborate on that on this hike, and he's going to be recording himself as he goes along.
That's great.
You were worried about blue words before. Let me tell you, you don't hold a candle to Harold. this guy broke new boundaries here on LOA today in terms of how far we go with blue words. So,
Oh, really? And he was he was definitely controlling himself.
oh, I know he was. I know he was. But
I love
nevertheless,
Harold.
you know,
He's just raw, and he's just letting it out
he's
there.
raw and earthy.
Right.
He just,
Yeah.
you know, he talks like, you know, like a military guy, because that's what he was, you know.
Right.
So
Hey, there's something to be said about that.
But
Yeah, sure.
Harold will laugh at this, but let's call him a hippie shit military guy, because he's like, he's like, it's all this hippie shit, but he's so, Rita, you know, he's had experiences, right?
Yes.
It's just boom. He's been like pushed into the ascension. He made a jump instead of some of us are gradually doing it.
Yes.
He made this humongous quantum leap twice with 2 of these types of experiences now.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to get that message out.
Right.
And really, he wants to help military, but anybody. And a lot of the military people might not open to it unless it's like behind closed doors, you know, because just like Harold's like, this hippie shit, like, you know, like, I can't believe I'm saying this stuff.
He said that on the show too.
Oh yeah.
That's great. That is great. I love it.
And he follows us too. Every once in a while, I'll see one of his comments under the videos on YouTube. So he's following us, which is great.
Yeah.
Do we have anybody in the query that is commenting or asking questions?
No, it's been really quiet. People are listening and watching, but I think they're waiting to see what we're going to conclude with all this, because this was a tough topic. I mean, two chapters that really challenged us. It again reminded me of what it was like when Cindy and I were doing the Neville books. Some of those books, there was actually one book we refused to do, to be perfectly honest. He did 11 books. We did 10 of them.
Right.
The 11th one was literally one Bible verse after another. And we said, no, we're throwing in the towel. Forget it. We're just not doing this.
Done.
Basically, he was just trying to justify all these different Bible verses, and we just weren't really interested in that. But
you know what? But it's pretty cool when you see a Bible verse put out there with this understanding, because, you know, it's been just, who knows what's distorted really, unless you were there at the time, but it seems like it's been distorted to be something else to serve an institution more so than the person.
Oh God, yes.
100%.
You have to remember too.
It speaks in metaphors.
Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
It speaks in metaphors, and if you're not guided in the right direction with it, it's totally taken out of context. And I mean, just look at the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament alone, right?
Yeah.
Just look at that difference. This vengeful, you know, God who will, you know, destroy you if you don't this and that, and the whole concept of sin with, you know, this whole idea of Adam and Eve. Please, let's not even, because that just makes me nuts.
It's really something too, because when we think about it and we look at the history of it, we realize that most of what was written about Jesus the Christ was written well after he died. In many cases, hundreds of years after he died.
Yeah.
Which kind of makes you wonder, okay, well, how did they know? You know, they weren't there. They got this. This is like a story that was passed down and passed down and passed down.
So, but I've heard that, have you guys ever heard of the lost story or verse of Thomas?
Yeah.
Right. So there's supposedly things in there like the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah.
Because Thomas was around when he was around. So they wanted to not really, they didn't want his writings to come out because there was certain truths in there that they didn't want people to know, because the institutions were like, no, we need to keep the masses in check.
Right.
So I actually have a book on that I'm going to be reading, and it'd be interesting to see his version, you know, because he was there with him. And of course, who knows, you know, that was 100 years, you know, 2,000 years ago. Who knows who could have messed what he set up as well. But hopefully.
Well, that was also a theme that was played out in the movie and the book, The Da Vinci Code.
Right.
They explained how there was the Council of Nicaea, and at the Council of Nicaea, all the different sects of Christianity were brought together to debate and discuss all the different things, and they ended up kicking out half of the books because they portrayed Jesus as a man, according to the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah.
And which actually there's a lot of historical basis to say, yeah, you could see how that would be what happened. But the point is, they were removed. They were not included in what was
That's right.
the Bible. Unquote.
The whole story with Mary Magdalene was taken out.
Yeah, all that. a whole bunch of stuff taken out.
Yeah,
Well,
So,
and reincarnation, right? Because
exactly.
if we weren't afraid to die, then we're not going to obey the new rules.
Right.
Obey in that sense.
Obey in that sense. Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
Good one.
No, there's been a lot of explorations and a lot of explanations and so forth of what has happened, and I think they're all healthy because, among other things, they help remind us they were all these stories were written by people who were writing what based on what they believed. It was their own beliefs that they were writing, and different people can believe you. I mean, this is something that police and detectives have trouble with. You know, they'll have a crime that occurred, and then they'll interview the witnesses, and all the witnesses will disagree.
Right.
They were all there. They all saw the same event, but you wouldn't know it by their testimony.
Right. Because
You know?
everything's an interesting point of view. That's an
That's
access
right.
consciousness. Everything's an interesting point of view.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And that's really valuable information to retain. The
Sure.
fact that different points of view see things differently and understand the same event completely differently.
Yep.
You know? So
Agreed.
I think what that ultimately ends up doing is it ends up encouraging all of us to say, don't take a literal story as your guide. Go inside and listen to the story within. What is your story telling you?
Mhm.
And
Listen
that's
to
what this
that one.
book's talking about.
That's
That's
right.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that inside story, well, that is the inside story.
Oh,
Good stuff. All right. Well,
good stuff.
then next week is going to be also interesting. A lot less of a challenge because the word that is the main word in the chapter is a much easier word from our perspective. The law of success. That one sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun.
What if it's not what we think it is?
That's it.
You never know, I
waiting.
suppose.
Yeah.
Well, what we'll have to do is we'll have to find out what Raymond Holliwell's perspective on success.
Yes.
Yes.
And that's going to give us a lot to talk about. That'll be good stuff. But
Good
in the
stuff.
meantime, this has been great. Thank you very much, ladies. Thank you also
Thank
to
you.
our very quiet but very attentive live stream audience. They were, I think, again, they were just waiting to see where we were going to lead this because they didn't dare say anything.
They're just soaking it all in. It's like Rita and I just soaked this book in all week to even come up with whatever we talked about today.
That's
Right.
it.
And it worked.
We
It
were
worked
winging it.
beautifully.
Yeah.
It worked great. Oh, I forgot to do the promos. Got to do the promos before we go. Reminding people who are not yet subscribers to become subscribers. Very simple. If you haven't figured out how to do it, we have made it simple on our homepage. Go to loatoday.net and you will see instructions at the top of the page for the particular kind of device that you are using in terms of how to become a subscriber. Also check us out on YouTube because as we record, we live stream to YouTube, so you can actually watch us, see us in video while we're doing this, in addition to the sound that you normally get with a podcast. But check us out both ways. And I just wanted to put out a little thought into people's minds and maybe even get feedback. Anybody who wants to write in about this, to tell me what you think about it. I have for the longest time wanted to create an app, specifically an LOA Today app, so that people could just download the app and all the episodes would be right there and there'd be ways to interact with us and so forth. And people, individuals that I've talked to have liked that idea a lot. The difficulty is, let me tell you, writing an app is very challenging. It's much more difficult than, say, writing a web page or something like that. So it's going to be a while. I will give you one little piece of hope, though. I found something associated with the particular software that I use for storing the episodes of this podcast. I don't use one of the main services. There are services like Podbean and Blueberry and all these others where you can set up a podcast and they'll store all the files and so forth. I actually store my own using a WordPress plugin called Podlove. And the people who create this Podlove have created a web player that can be programmatically used in other applications. Now, they don't tell you exactly how to do it, so you have to kind of have some programming background, which I have some of. So I'm going to be exploring this, but the long story short is I may be able to get this app put together sooner than I'd hoped, because I'd hoped to have it in like the next 2 years, maybe even a few months, maybe even shorter than that.
Wow.
So
I
don't
get
hold me to it.
emails. I get emails like every day, people wanting to create an app for me. Do you ever get
God,
any of
yeah.
those?
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
but so you looked into different services?
Oh, sure. Oh, I've looked
Okay.
into tons of them. The thing is, the ones that are trying to make you an app are usually trying to make you one particular kind of app, and they don't have a whole lot of flexibility in what they can do.
Okay.
There are a few apps that you can get out there as a podcaster. They will also do certain things that the makers of those apps want you to be able to buy. If you want to have something that does exactly what you want to do, be prepared to spend 5 figures or more, because that level of customization, yeah,
Right.
it's very challenging. It's very, very challenging to do.
You can do it.
You can do it.
You can. Yeah.
Follow
I have
the
been
law.
working on this for my wife's gardening business. I figured it's the same kind of skill. I just have to kind of reapply it. So
That's
you know,
right.
we're getting
Look at
closer. Is
that.
what I'm saying.
Manifesting on a dime. Look at you.
And keep asking the universe questions. How do I get this app out sooner? And what can I do to develop this app? Just ask the questions. That's how it
That's
works.
it.
The universe wants to answer our questions.
You have no idea how often I ask that question.
Okay, good.
No idea. I mean, 'cause
Good.
I was during my walk today, I was putting out there constantly, I need better ideas of how to get to this app sooner. I need better. Give me some guidance. And part of the guidance
You went
that I
from
got
2
was
years
what
to
I
a
just
few
talked about.
months. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
went
yeah.
from 2 years to a few months.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that in of itself is a feat.
Woo.
No. Now all I gotta do is get from a few months down to a few days, you know.
There you go.
Well, give yourself
Easy.
a couple of weeks.
It's
You gotta
as
let it
easy to
settle.
manifest a button as a castle. I just have to think of it as a button.
That's it.
So
Can't wait.
And what
anyway,
if
thank
what
you,
if
ladies. This has
what
been
if the
great.
universe gave it to you in exact timing? Wouldn't that be nice?
It always does, fortunately, which is a good thing.
Yeah. So what if you want to align with that? Might take away some resistance.
That's a good idea. I'll take that on board. So
Awesome.
thank you again. On top of thank you, I thank you again.
All right.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you, live streamers. Thank you, podcast listeners as well. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.